Hi, everybody. It's Mike Kennedy, Vermont Bar Council. Thanks for joining today. It's Wednesday. It's a beautiful morning. Clear blue sky. It's going to be about 80, 85 later. It's only about 50 right now. I love mornings like this. Anyway, this is a follow-up to last week's video when I made bread. First, thanks to all the people who reached out in response to the video. Probably between 5 and 10 members of Vermont's legal community who let me know that baking is actually something they do for their own well-being. Many people mentioned how it's a stress reliever, a great way just to get away from the rigors of the day. So I thank you. I appreciate those connections that I'm able to make with you through the blog and videos like this. So thanks for that. Okay, so last week I made the video of making bread. It was part of Well-Being Week in Law. It was on the day devoted to intellectual well-being and the importance of engaging and growing, constantly challenging ourselves to learn new things. There's a concept in legal ethics and professional responsibility known as self-reporting. The idea being that a lawyer, as a member of a profession that has the privilege to self-regulate, should self-report violations or aspire to consider self-reporting violations of the ethical standards that apply to the profession. I'm here today to self-report a violation of the ethical standards that apply to bread making and bread makers. There's two of them, two different violations. One would probably not get me disbarred or result in a serious sanction against my bread making license if it were standing alone. Considered with the other, however, and that's another concept in legal ethics, the more wrong things you do, the more violations of the ethics rules you commit, likely the sanction will be more severe. There's another violation I committed that standing alone, I think probably requires disbarment. But I'm going to lay it all out for you and sort of leave myself at your mercy. I will at the end argue that there are some factors that mitigate in my favor that perhaps would allow you to be a little more lenient than you otherwise would with somebody who just made the mistakes I made, didn't have those factors going for them. So here's what happened. When I left you last, I had taken the bread out of the oven. And I had been talking about how beautiful it was. It was beautiful. How beautiful it looked, how much money I'd pay for it if it was on sale in a store, blah, blah, blah. Well, as soon as I turned the video off, I cut it open. Problem number one, did not look at all like bread on the inside. I don't know what it looked like. Not bread. Told my brother later that it looked like baklava because it was like gooey with some flakes, and I don't know. I don't know what it looked like. I can't describe it. Didn't really taste right. I walked a piece down to my mom. She lives close. She was kind. She said, well, you got the taste correct, because I tasted like rosemary. Left unsaid, which she didn't have to say because it was so clear. You didn't get anything else right. There's nothing else right about this, but I can taste a few of the rosemary flakes that you put in. So it was awful, basically terrible. That's probably a violation in and of itself right there, not to correct the video. There is a rule that says lawyers have to be truthful when dealing with others, and that, misrepresentation can occur by silence. So by failing to correct the video, where I left the impression that the bread had come out perfect, or at least close to perfect, I'd probably violate the rules. I hadn't even thought of that one. Anyway, so there's another thing to add to my self-report. Okay, back to the bread. So the next day, or might not have been the next day, whenever, day or two later, I debriefed with the first brother. You'll recall the first brother helped me with the process. He was texting me throughout. And he's a great cook. So he was my role model, my muse. We couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. He asked me, tell me what you did. Let's go through the recipe. What did you do? And I'd done everything. Then he said to me, first he thought maybe my oven didn't get hot enough. And I wanted to latch onto that because that would make it not my fault, right? Not my fault. I mean, I put the oven at the temperature the thing said to put it at. It's not my fault that the oven doesn't actually work correctly. I didn't know that. So I had some hope. Hope was quickly dispelled. Here's how. First brother said to me, how long did you need the dough for? And I said, I don't know, a minute or two, which is true. But which is very, very wrong, which is bad. He said, and he was, I could tell he was frustrated. He said, I told you you had to do it for 15 minutes. And he's correct. I actually looked back through the text exchange we'd had during the bread making process, and he had told me to knead it for about 15 minutes. And not only that, he'd said, because he knows my limitations, he said, if you don't know how, find a video on YouTube about how to knead bread and do what the video does. I didn't do that either. So I didn't knead the bread long enough. And to make it worse, I looked back at the recipe, right in the recipe. And you remember, I was talking about how usually I just wing things, but I was going to follow the recipe verbatim. It says knead the dough for at least 10 minutes. Didn't. I don't know. So that's the first violation of the standards of bread making conduct. I don't think that one alone would get me disbarred. I really don't. I think maybe a short suspension from the ranks of the bread makers, maybe just a reprimand. Problem is, and this is also another theory that applies to legal ethics and professional responsibility, the more violations you commit, the more likely it's going to be that, the sanction is going to be significant. There's another violation I committed that, brings disbarment into play and is much more significant than just not kneading the bread for the exact right amount of time. So as you recall, so we finished that. We think, well, maybe, you didn't knead the bread long enough, but my brother still couldn't figure out. It doesn't make sense that it came out so awful if that's the only mistake you made. And he couldn't quite place his finger on it until I opened my big mouth. What I said was, during the debrief, what do I do with the extra yeast? And he said, what are you talking about? Now you got to picture this. This is me talking to my brother, who's an excellent cook and has been a cook for many, many years. Actually used to get paid to be a cook. It's like me talking to Einstein about physics or relativity. It's a just disconnect. There's not using the same words, but nobody really knows what the other's talking about. I said, what do I do with my extra yeast? What are you talking about? So I've got some extra yeast. It's in my refrigerator in a bowl. How long will it keep? Can I use it again? Can I make another batch? He said, what are you talking about? And I said, so we go back and forth like that for a while. And that led to the moment where he figured out exactly what I did wrong. Here's what happened. So you remember during the video, I actually started mocking these little packets of yeast because my recipe called for a tablespoon, and this is 2 1/4 teaspoons. So I was making fun of that. Well, turns out the joke's on me. The recipe did in fact call for a tablespoon of yeast to be put into a bowl. I used this bowl with a cup of water and a tablespoon of sugar. I did that. And you're supposed to let it, be in the bowl until it activates, till it gets fizzy or starts bubbling. And I did that. Where I went wrong was I thought that this mixture, this 1 cup of water, this 1 tablespoon of sugar, and this 1 tablespoon of yeast, I thought I was supposed to take a tablespoon of this, the final result, to add to the flour. That is not the case. You're supposed to take the entire concoction, the 1 cup of water, the 1 tablespoon of the yeast, and the 1 tablespoon of sugar. Put that with your flour and the other stuff and go from there. That was my mistake. So when I was asking my brother, what do I do with my leftover yeast? I was referring to the mixture that remained in this bowl, which was the mixture minus the 1 tablespoon that I'd put in with mine. Wow. So pretty simple. What happened is I used about 1/10 the amount of yeast required and water and sugar. So the dough didn't rise. So that's why my bread came out so horribly. That, I think, is the disbarable offense. I'm embarrassed. I really have no excuse. It's not one of those situations like, we have another rule that talks about if a lawyer does something at the direction of a supervisor, might give that's wrong, it's a violation of the rules. Yeah, lawyer, you shouldn't have done it anyway, but we're also going to go after your supervisor for telling you to do that thing that violates the rules. It's not that, this is not a situation where my brother ratified or condoned what I'd done. He was doing his best to shepherd through a pretty simple process, somebody who is so simple that they can't even figure out how to do the simple things. So I can't assign blame to him. I fall on my own sword. And I guess that's where we'll leave it. That was the mistake I made. But here's what I did as a result. We talked about engaging and growing. I'm going to grow from this. Like, I'm going to grow. I'm going to learn from my mistake. And in fact, I will submit to you that I already have. Here's how. Another concept in the lawyer discipline process is, when we get to what we think the sanction should be, we're going to look at whether there are other factors that either aggravate it, call for something more severe, or mitigate it, call for something less severe than would normally be imposed for that violation. I do have some mitigating factors. So one is, if you try to make amends for what you did wrong, essentially, good faith efforts to make restitution, acknowledging that what you did is wrong, not disputing it. I'm here to acknowledge what I did was wrong. I am here to tell you about the good faith effort I made to make amends. So on Sunday was Mother's Day. You'll recall my mom was coming over here. I was going to make my chicken. I did. It was excellent. Awesome. To surprise her. And after she had been so kind in telling me that my bread, well, you got the taste right. I decided, and to impress the first brother, because he was coming over here, I decided to make bread again, to try again. And this time I did it right. Should have filmed it. I didn't. Came out really well. The dough rose this time because I needed it I didn't need it just for 10 minutes. I probably needed it for like 17 just to be sure. I poured the entire bowl of the, whatever that's called. My brother told me the slurry maybe or something. And I poured that into the flour, kneaded it forever. I actually floured my hands and floured the counter this time. I kind of got into it because when you're doing it right, it's fun. Cooked it. The bread came out. It was fantastic. I thought it was fantastic. I don't know if it was perfect, but it was definitely, it was edible. It was good. And we ate it all up, some little oil. I'd made fun of that too, but it was great in the olive oil. I actually had enough left over to have a piece of toast the next morning. So I think, me doing that and having it come out so well, and not only just come out so well, but on Mother's Day, come on. That argues in my favor and perhaps will mitigate the sanction. Now, I will confess that in my do-over, it was my second do-over, because the first time I started the do-over Sunday morning, I was so eager that you end up using 4 tablespoons of butter total throughout the recipe, 2 in the mixture, the dough, then 2 to sort of brush on the bread after it cooks. And I messed that up the first time I did it. I put all 4 tablespoons into the dough. And when I realized it, I was like, oh my gosh, what is that? Does that mean I just like double the flour or something? And I couldn't figure out how to correct for that. And I read that it makes the bread taste really bad. So I dumped that and started again. So this is actually my second do-over. It was my 3rd attempt. But I submit to you that, the record before you doesn't necessarily require disbarment from the ranks of the bread making. Perhaps I should be required to take a brief time out. But I think that at the most, I'll leave it to you, weigh in, sentence me as you will. Anyhow, thanks again to everybody who engaged with me in this. I guess maybe that's part of my intellectual growth, the engagement that came with actually, doing these videos, sharing with you the bread making experience. Thanks to my mother, and thanks especially to my brother for helping me out, sort of guiding me kindly and gently along the path to hopefully becoming a semi-competent bread maker. That's all I've got. and have a great day.